Bush's choice of Dick Cheney as his running mate was a calculated effort to balance the ticket. Cheney brought deep Washington experience, a reputation for policy expertise, and the image of a steady hand, qualities that complemented Bush's relative inexperience and outsider, plain-spoken appeal. Together, they projected a combination of pragmatism and authenticity that reassured both conservative voters and centrists that were wary of Bush's political resume, which was quite thin. Welcome to Chasing Power. I'm your host, Charles Denyer, and tonight, George W. Bush, a president born of dynasty and dispute, thrust into office by the narrowest of margins, transformed by a day of fire and ash, and remembered for decisions that unleashed war, expanded American power, tested the limits of democracy, and forever altered the course of the 21st century.
I'm running for president of the United States. There's no turning back, and I intend to be the next president of the United States.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. My answer is bring them on. We got the force necessary to deal with the security situation.
Welcome to Chasing Power, the path to Pennsylvania Avenue, a Charles Denyer Productions podcast.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
The audacity of hope. America, you've vindicated that hope.
And we will make America great again.
George Walker Bush did not enter American politics as a blank slate. He entered as an inheritance. Born in 1946 into one of the most powerful political families in modern U.S. history, Bush grew up surrounded by proximity to power, but not a mastery of it. His father, George H.W. Bush, would become a congressman from Texas, ambassador to the United Nations, chief diplomat to China, CIA director, vice president, and ultimately 41st president of the United States. Expectations shadowed the younger Bush from an early age, but for years he seemed defined not by discipline or purpose, but by alcohol-fueled nights and an unfocused path. Bush attended Yale University, where he joined Skull and Bones, a fact later mythologized as evidence of elite grooming. But at the time, he was an unremarkable student, better known for his charm than discipline. After Yale and Harvard Business School, his early adulthood was marked by business failures, continued heavy drinking, and a restless search for purpose. Then came the turning point. In 1985, Bush experienced a religious reawakening after conversations with evangelist Billy Graham. He quit drinking and embraced born-again Christianity, an identity shift that would later anchor his political persona and shape his moral certainty as President of the United States. Faith did more than alter his behavior. It gave him a story to tell, and in politics, that story was essential. Bush first tested the political waters in 1978, throwing his hat in the ring for a West Texas congressional seat. The result was his first and ultimately only electoral defeat. Running against Kent Hance, Bush discovered that ambition and name recognition were not enough. Texas politics proved rougher and more intimate than he had anticipated, but also unexpectedly forgiving of reinvention. His only political defeat left him with lasting lessons. Know your audience, never alienate Christian fundamentalists, and respond forcefully when attacked. By 1994, George W. Bush had reemerged not as a political heir apparent, but as a long-shot contender in the Texas governor's race, daring to challenge one of the state's most formidable Democrats, Ann Richards. As for Richards, she was a sharp-tongued liberal icon with national stature who had upended Republican challenger Clayton Williams in 1990 because of his comments regarding women and rape.
It's like the weather. If it's inevitable, relax and enjoy it.
And on Richards' apparent drinking challenges.
I hope she didn't go back to drinking again.
The 1994 contest was widely considered unwinnable for Bush. However, he recast himself as a compassionate conservative, plain-spoken, values-driven, and relentlessly disciplined. Against all expectations, he actually prevailed, stunning the political establishment and announcing his arrival as a serious political force. The victory was also payback to Ann Richards for what many perceived as her cheap shot comment at the 1988 Democratic Convention regarding former President George H.W. Bush.
Poor George. He can't help it. He was born with a silver foot in his mouth.
Those close to George W. Bush say he and his mother, Barbara Bush, never forgave Ann Richards for that stunt, making Bush's 1994 gubernatorial victory all the more sweeter for the Bush family. As governor, Bush governed cautiously, but with clear strategic intent. He worked with Democrats on education reform, criminal justice, and welfare. His education agenda, especially its emphasis on standardized testing and accountability, would become the blueprint for No Child Left Behind. Critics, however, argued that Bush's accomplishments were overstated. They contended that Texas' booming economy masked political shortcomings, that his bipartisan reputation was exaggerated in a state where many Democrats were just as conservative as Republicans, and that his rise was carefully managed by political operatives, chief among them Karl Rove. But metrics mattered less than momentum. Texas was turning redder by the day in the 1990s, and Bush benefited from that shift. In 1998, he won re-election as governor in a landslide, cementing his credibility and national appeal. By June 1999,
But I've come here to tell you today this. I'm running for President of the United States.
he declared his candidacy for the presidency. By then, Bush had accomplished something unexpected. He had made himself electable on his own terms. No longer merely the president's son, he became a figure voters could project onto, authentic to supporters, underestimated by opponents, and perfectly positioned for a national run. Bush's choice of Dick Cheney as his running mate was a calculated effort to balance the ticket. Cheney brought deep Washington experience, a reputation for policy expertise, and the image of a steady hand, qualities that complemented Bush's relative inexperience and outsider, plain-spoken appeal. Together, they projected a combination of pragmatism and authenticity that reassured both conservative voters and centrists that were wary of Bush's political resume, which was quite thin. In the campaign, Bush distinguished himself in all three debates against Vice President Al Gore. He demonstrated discipline, composure, and an ability to frame issues in clear, memorable terms, holding his own against a seasoned national figure as Gore. Yet, despite his strong performances, the 2000 election remained unusually volatile and tightly contested. On the eve of Election Day, polls pointed to a statistical dead heat between Bush and Gore, masking a deeper problem: a polarized electorate and a profound misunderstanding of how the Electoral College would override popular expectations, a tension that would ultimately define the chaos that followed. The night of November 7th, 2000 was supposed to be decisive. Instead, it became a national nightmare.
Probably at least 500 people outside, spirited demonstrators both for Bush and Gore.
As the polls closed, television networks first called Florida for Al Gore, then retracted it. Hours later, they swung the state to George W. Bush, only to pull it back again. By midnight, the presidency of the United States hinged on a margin so thin it defied comprehension. A few hundred votes out of nearly 6 million cast in Florida. Adding to the drama of election night, the story took a turn no one in both camps expected. As television networks initially projected Florida for George W. Bush, Al Gore did what tradition and decorum demanded. He called Bush to concede the election. Bush accepted the call, believing the contest had finally come to an end after an exhausting night. But only hours later, just moments before Gore was set to address his supporters in Nashville, Tennessee, new vote totals revealed that the margin in Florida was narrowing to a few hundred votes, enough to trigger an automatic recount. Gore reached for the phone again. This time, he told Bush he was withdrawing his concession. Bush, nearly stunned by the reversal, said to Gore, "Let me understand. You're calling me back to retract your concession?" Gore snapped back, "You don't have to get snippy about it," and abruptly hung up the phone. The call ended, but the political shockwave had only begun. America did not go to sleep with the president-elect. It went to sleep with a question mark and woke up with one hell of a political hangover. At the center of the chaos was a ballot design that would become infamous, the Palm Beach butterfly ballot. Thousands of voters, many elderly, later said they were confused, some accidentally voting for the right-wing conservative firebrand Pat Buchanan instead of Al Gore. And during the 2000 Florida recount, the dispute centered not on an abstract vote total, but on the physical ballots themselves, paper punch cards and the impressions left by voters' choices. Arguments erupted over how to interpret partially punched holes. And terms like hanging chads, dimpled chads, and even pregnant chads entered the national vocabulary. Suddenly, the machinery of democracy looked disturbingly fragile. What should have been a clean civic ritual turned into a forensic examination of paper, holes, and voter intent. So because of the close vote count, Florida law triggered an automatic recount. Well, then came lawsuits, then counter lawsuits. County canvassing boards argued over standards. Protesters flooded courthouses. Partisan lawyers descended like armies. And hovering above all of it was a political reality impossible to ignore. And what was that? That Florida's governor was Jeb Bush, George W. Bush's brother. Though no evidence ever proved direct interference, the optics alone poisoned public trust and fueled allegations that would linger for decades. The battle escalated to the highest court in the land. On December 12, 2000, in Bush v. Gore, the United States Supreme Court halted the recount, ruling 5-4 that varying recount standards violated the Equal Protection Clause. The decision effectively awarded Florida 25 electoral votes and the U.S. presidency to George W. Bush, who at that time was leading by 537 votes. The court itself cautioned that the ruling was limited to the present circumstances, a disclaimer that only deepened the sense of unease surrounding it. Al Gore conceded the next day.
Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming
delivering a speech that balanced constitutional duty with barely concealed heartbreak. It was a statesmanlike exit. And in defeat, it was probably Al Gore's greatest speech he ever gave. But the country remained split. Bush entered the White House without winning the popular vote, the first president to do so since 1888, and with nearly half the nation convinced the system had failed them. This was not a triumph, it was a fractured mandate. Bush would govern under a cloud of doubt, this very legitimacy questioned before his first cabinet meeting. And history would soon test whether a president chosen by the narrowest of margins could lead a nation through crisis, or whether that fracture would widen under pressure. Because just months later, everything would change. The morning of September 11th, 2001 began like any other for President George W. Bush. He was in Sarasota, Florida, visiting Emma E. Booker Elementary School, seated in a small classroom listening as second graders read The Pet Goat. It was meant to be a photo op, a soft-focus moment for a president still defining himself after a disputed election. Then, at approximately 9:05 a.m., White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card leaned in and whispered words that would permanently alter the course of American history.
A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack.
Bush's face barely changed. Was it shock, discipline, confusion, or the first instinct of a man realizing the presidency he thought he had inherited no longer existed? Within hours, nearly 3,000 people were dead. The World Trade Center lay in ruins. Part of the Pentagon smoldered.
United 9-3, have you got information on that yet?
Yeah, he's down.
He's down?
Yes.
And a fourth plane, United Flight 93, had been brought down in a Pennsylvania field after passengers, realizing what was happening, fought back and sacrificed their lives to stop the attack from reaching its intended target. The United States was suddenly confronted with an enemy unlike any it had faced ever before. The attacks, carried out by al-Qaeda, were the deadliest terrorist assault in modern history and the first successful foreign attack on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor, an event that shattered any lingering sense of invulnerability and permanently altered America's sense of security, power, and purpose. That night, Bush addressed the nation from the Oval Office. No soaring rhetoric, just resolve, and a stern warning to our enemies.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
In an instant, the underdog president with a fractured mandate became a wartime commander-in-chief. The psychological transformation was profound. Friends and aides later described a man hardened almost overnight, decisive, inward, increasingly certain that history had chosen him for this moment. Bush leaned heavily on faith, telling aides that God had placed him in the presidency for a reason, a claim both deeply motivating to his supporters, but also deeply unsettling to his critics. The country rallied. Approval ratings surged above 90%, some of the highest poll numbers ever recorded for a U.S. president. Democrats and Republicans stood together on the steps of the Capitol and sang, "God Bless America." Flags appeared everywhere. For a brief moment, politics stopped and the nation united under God and under one president. But unity masked uncertainty. What did victory look like against an ideology? How do you deter men willing to die? And how far should a democracy go to defend itself before it begins to erode its own values? Within weeks, Bush would declare a global war on terror, authorize the invasion of Afghanistan, and quietly approve a new architecture of surveillance, detention, and executive power that would redefine the balance between liberty and security. September 11th did not just rewrite Bush's presidency. It rewrote America's relationship with fear, power, and the world. And the hardest decisions? They had not even begun yet. Because if 9/11 was the moment America united in grief, the next question would divide it for a generation. How far should a wounded superpower go to prevent the next attack? And at what cost? The smoke had barely cleared from lower Manhattan when the Bush presidency pivoted from stunned survival to uncompromising resolve. In the days following September 11th, 2001, George W. Bush made a decision that would define not just his presidency, but the architecture of American power in the 21st century. The United States would no longer wait to be attacked again. It would strike first. This profound ideology would become a focal point of the Bush Doctrine, a post-9/11 foreign policy that rested on several interrelated principles. It asserted the right to preventive war, striking potential adversaries, whether terrorists or rogue states, before they could launch attacks, thereby challenging traditional notions of deterrence. It made no distinction between terrorists and the nations that harbored them, holding states accountable as if they were direct enemies themselves. At the same time, the administration framed the promotion of democracy as a tool to combat terrorism and foster stable, peaceful societies. Finally, it embraced a willingness to act unilaterally, asserting that the United States would protect its security even without broad international consensus. On September 20th, 2001, standing before a joint session of Congress, Bush laid down a stark ultimatum to the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had provided sanctuary to Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda.
Deliver to United States authorities all the leaders of al-Qaeda who hide in your land.
And there would be no neutrality.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Less than 3 weeks later, Operation Enduring Freedom began. On October 7th, 2001, the U.S. and allied forces launched airstrikes against Taliban targets across Afghanistan. Working alongside the Northern Alliance, Afghan militias opposed to Taliban rule. The U.S. toppled the Taliban regime with stunning speed. Kabul fell by November. Kandahar followed in December. By early 2002, the Taliban government was gone, and al-Qaeda's training infrastructure lay in ruins. At home, Bush's approval rating soared above 90%.
George W. Bush!
Among the highest ever recorded for a U.S. president. He was no longer the disputed winner of a fractured election. He was a wartime leader. But beneath the swift military victory lay deeper, more consequential choices. Bush's national security team, Vice President Dick Cheney, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz advanced a radical idea: preemption. Traditional Cold War deterrence assumed rational adversaries and clear state actors, but in their eyes, al-Qaeda and the growing global terrorist threat fit neither category. The Bush administration argued that waiting for proof of an imminent threat could mean waiting for catastrophe. This logic was formalized in the 2002 National Security Strategy, which declared that the United States would act preemptively against emerging threats, including states suspected of harboring terrorists or pursuing weapons of mass destruction. Supporters saw this doctrine as realism in an age of stateless terror. Critics warned it shattered international norms, lowered the threshold for war, and gave presidents unprecedented unilateral power. Legal scholars debated whether preemption blurred dangerously into preventive war, striking not because an attack was imminent, but because one might occur someday. Meanwhile, Afghanistan itself proved far more complicated than early victories suggested. Osama bin Laden escaped during the Battle of Tora Bora in late 2001, an outcome later criticized as a missed opportunity caused by reliance on local militia rather than U.S. ground forces. And the U.S. began its long, painful, and costly road into nation building, which began with regime change and a new Afghan government installed under Hamid Karzai. NATO forces arrived, trillions of dollars would eventually be spent, and slowly the war in Afghanistan began to stretch, from months into years and from clarity into ambiguity. The war on terror had begun as a focused response to a singular horror, the September 11, 2001 attacks. But under the doctrine of preemption, it was quietly expanding, geographically, legally, and morally. And as Afghanistan settled into a long, uncertain conflict, Bush's gaze, and America's, shifted toward another target, one that would test the doctrine of preemption to its breaking point. If Afghanistan was the war of necessity, what came next would be framed as the war of choice. Up next on Episode 7, Part 2 of our George W. Bush series.
Any outlaw regime that has ties to terrorist groups and seeks or possesses weapons of mass destruction is a grave danger to the civilized world and will be confronted.
War, misjudgment, and the collapse of confidence. Thanks for listening to Chasing Power, The Path to Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm your host, Charles Denyer.
Before we wrap up, don't miss out on Charles's 2 other powerhouse podcasts. Want weekly intel on the national security threats most never see? Threat Level Red delivers hard-hitting updates on rogue nations, global conflicts, cyber warfare, and more, all revealed with unflinching clarity. And for leaders navigating today's digital world, The Brief with Charles Denyer is your trusted guide to cybersecurity, compliance, risk, and AI. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Chasing Power, The Path to Pennsylvania Avenue is a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. All opinions expressed are those of the host and do not reflect the official positions of any political organization, government agency, or private institution. This podcast is for news reporting, commentary, and criticism. We use excerpts, clips, and quotations from political events and other copyrighted works under the Fair Use Doctrine. All rights in those works remain with their respective owners. The views expressed are our own and do not represent any other entity.